Hey there, grace and peace to you today. This is the Shield Online, the Salvation Army Hanford Corps exploration of Scripture and meaning. I'm Captain Roger McCourt, your guide on our journey towards better understanding. We have spent a few weeks looking at stories about Jesus in a somewhat different way, and we'll be doing that today too, but I want to start by asking a question that I've been wrestling with. Now, I think I've discerned the answer, but perhaps you'll have a better idea we could talk about. Let me start with the question. I do need to set this up just a bit. There are a lot of things that followers of Jesus do or wish they could do because Jesus did them, which makes sense to me because that's what it means to be a disciple, to learn to be like your master, to do the things the master does. And we are told about all kinds of things that Jesus did which are out of the norm. The obvious things were speaking up for the oppressed and unloved, and then the healing thing, curing, perhaps miraculously so, everything from skin diseases to death. There was also that casting out of demons and the rebuking of religious leaders whose teaching ignored God's grand view of the community that human beings are tasked with creating. Those are all things, one way or another, that followers of Jesus are still involved in doing today. Even the miracle bits. And I know not everyone believes that is a real or a possible thing, but many who follow Jesus believe that it is something that they should do by praying for or laying hands on someone in need or whatever. Who hasn't heard about someone making an impossible recovery from cancer or some other affliction, and that person saying they believed it was because people prayed for them to be healed? I even know one woman who is absolutely convinced that the severe life-threatening allergies that plagued her for her entire life disappeared after she went to this retreat where a faith healer prayed over her. My point being, there are committed believers who act to do the things Jesus did. As far as I've been able to determine, there are serious movements and teachers devoted to performing everything Jesus performed, which is in line with his promise that his disciples would do more and greater things than he did. Except for one thing. And that's my question. Why? Why is it that there are no followers of Jesus who practice walking on water? There's no movement, there's no stories, no ancient church folklore about early disciples going for a stroll across the Mediterranean. Now, I said that I think I have an answer, and I do, but I don't like it. But before I get to that, though, let me tell you the story so you'll have a way to understand my answer and perhaps come up with one of your own. Like several of the stories we've looked at, this one really began when Jesus fed thousands of hungry people in the wilderness in Israel. They had followed him out to hear him speak and to see him heal because, as I've mentioned, there was no TV, and watching street preachers and faith healers was the ancient version of Netflix and chill. In this case, there had been a miscalculation on the part of every attendee. Either they didn't expect Jesus to take them so far out into the sticks, or they just didn't realize it was going to be 2 or more hours to the nearest drive-thru. Now, someone did offer up a couple of fish witches, and Jesus took them and thanked God for them and proceeded to turn them into food for thousands on thousands of people and a dozen baskets filled with leftovers besides. And God, if you remember, used Moses to give his people manna and quail in the wilderness, and now here he'd use Jesus to do a new version of that same trick here in the Promised Land. As folks realized what had happened, they got a little nuts. Was this the sign of the Messiah they'd been waiting for? The healing, the feeding, the obsessive teaching on living a life faithful to God? Jesus was ticking off all the boxes. And folks started talking about using this gathering to launch a rebellion and declare Jesus as their king. Then they could go pick up some weapons and go to war against the Romans who'd kept them captive for about a century. And then Jesus, realizing this is all starting to slip sideways a little bit, he pulled his key disciples aside, and he told them to go grab one of the larger boats they were traveling with and to set out. He said he would catch up. And telling the crowd that they were done for the day, then Jesus headed up this nearby hill to spend some time praying. And the disciples, who were supposed to have set out, hung out on the beach, waiting for him. But when he hadn't come by nightfall, they took off without him, which is what he had told them to do in the first place. Now, the village that they were headed to was only about 6 miles away as a straight shot across this end of the Sea of Galilee. Several of the men on board were experienced sailors who'd spent their lives fishing on this lake. They knew the ins and outs and quirks here. This should have been a quick trip, even as darkness settled in. They wouldn't use the sails, which meant that everyone would take a turn or two on the oars to get them across. The boat wasn't large, but there were probably less than 20 people on board. It wasn't a luxury cruise, but it wasn't uncomfortable either, at least not at first. I do have to tell you that the Sea of Galilee, it's a funny place. It's not a huge lake. It's only 13 miles long. It's no more than 8 miles wide at any spot. And it is fed by the Jordan River and a handful of freshwater springs, surrounded by hills. Its surface, though, is more than 600 feet below sea level. And there are these tablelands to the southeast that allow cool air to pour into the bowl of the lake. And that cool air mixes with the warm air rising up from Galilee itself, causing winds that can gently move a sailing vessel to and fro, or which could turn from dead calm to a violent squall in just a matter of minutes. With no real warning, fishermen who were not experienced hands could find themselves capsized or driven onto the rocky shore and possibly destroyed by pounding waves. Stories said that the souls of the dead would remain trapped in the waters of the lake. Those were fairly new stories. They'd been creeping in from the outside world over the last few centuries. First the Greeks and then the Romans suggested that drowned spirits were cursed to wander beneath the surface, occasionally rising to walk among the waves on dark nights. For the most part, Jewish sailors didn't put much stock in such tales. After all, the sages said that the lake was home to demons and evil spirits, and who knew if the dead would be welcome to stay trapped among those cosmic entities or not, right? Now, large bodies of water, they're always dark and mysterious in every culture. They are a constant symbol of chaos and the things of this world that cannot be controlled by any but the greatest of the gods. This lake here, the Sea of Galilee, Lake Gennesaret, another name for it. This lake was such an important part of the lives and travel of people here that stories like these were part of them as much as the smell of fish was part of their fishermen. On Galilee, when things went well, travel was easy. When they went wrong, travel was harder. And when they went very wrong, it was impossible or close to it. Tonight, things went very wrong. Before they had gone far, the winds picked up, pushing them backwards and sideways despite expert handling of the oars, and after an hour they had gone almost nowhere. 2 hours. They should have landed by now. The dark shadows of the shore behind them remained in view, possibly. It was kind of hard to tell when waves kept breaking over the sides, and those waves were large enough to block any view. 3 hours. Had they moved at all? Or had they just been driven farther out towards the center of the lake? They couldn't tell for sure. It was not the worst storm they had ever been in, and as long as everyone stayed down and those working the oars kept them level, they would be cold and wet, but on the top side of the water where they belonged, or so they hoped. 4 hours passed, then 6. Still they labored to keep their heading. By now they were all tired, wishing they could reach maybe, I don't know, any part of the shore to take shelter until the storm passed. 9 hours. It was 3 a.m. They were all exhausted. Every stitch of clothing was soaked through. Every eye was squinted near shut by wind blowing foam and lake water into it. Every muscle of every person ached with the strain of repeatedly pulling on the long oars that kept the boat afloat and stable, while others bailed buckets of water out to keep from riding too low and sinking beneath the breaking waves. Every once in a while, the men would switch around from one back-breaking task to another, giving their bodies a chance to experience a different kind of pain for a while before switching back over and over again in what now seemed like this endless cycle. Conversation had stopped hours ago. Now it was just instructions being grunted out by the most experienced sailors while everyone tried to keep an eye on which one of those waves was going to hit them next. They would try to turn and steady the boat rather than risk being flipped. And then Matthew, God bless him, Matthew, the tax collector, a city boy who lived near the lake but who used to make his living taking the money from working people to give to the Romans, Matthew started peering out between the waves and muttering something to himself, and then he called it out, practically screaming to make his fear heard over the howl of the wind. "A ghost!" he cried, pointing out into the storm. "A ghost walking towards us on the waves!" And every head turned to see what he was talking about, and his fear was soaked up by most of the others as they decided that they also saw a shape rising and falling like a post as the sea rose and fell beneath it. Was it a water spout? The mast of another vessel, perhaps, trapped by the squall? No, it was moving against the wind. It was getting closer to them as if it was something traveling faster than they could row. Not that they were moving, really, but how could anything else make better time than they were? And then it was close enough for them to see that it was something like a human shape. Maybe it was a spirit or a demon trying to escape from that watery prison. Or maybe, like Matthew suggested, it was the soul of a drowned man rising up to meet them when their ship sunk. "Oh God, save us from this spirit." It came closer, definitely moving in their direction, definitely walking towards them, stepping over and around the tossing sea, riding the waves, getting closer. And they were terrified. They were shocked into immobility. Oars were forgotten. They missed seeing a wave until it was breaking over them, and they were all doused with a heavy splash that tried to drag them overboard. And then a voice rang out, carried by the wind so they could hear it as clearly as if it came from inside the boat. "Take heart. It's me. Don't panic." It was him. They could see him now almost on them. It was Jesus, and he was standing on the water, grinning at them as if this was some grand adventure they were all on together, like he was having the time of his life just watching them try not to drown. Well, James and John moved first. They grabbed the oars. They turned the boat. They tried to get it to slide broadside towards the master, shouting for him to get in, quickly, get into the boat. But Simon, the one they all called the Rock, he had a whole different reaction. He waved the others to be quiet, and he stood up, and he called out to Jesus, "Can I do that too? If that's you, Lord, tell me to come to you." All right, well, obviously Peter had been driven mad. The others reached out to pull him back down before he fell out of the tossing boat. Never stand up in a boat. But Jesus shouted back, "Come on." And then Simon was pushing the grasping hands away, throwing a leg over the side, and then the other leg, and then he was sitting on the gunwale, and then he stood up and started to walk out towards Jesus. Once again, the men on board just forgot what they were doing and watched, trying to comprehend what was happening here. Now, on the one hand, none of them should have been surprised. What was the purpose of being a disciple? To learn to do what the master was doing. After they had watched Jesus teach and heal and drive out demons, the teacher had commissioned each of the 12 men he had selected to be his apostles to go do the same. And then he sent them out in pairs to travel the countryside sharing his message. And each one of them had performed the kind of miraculous healing that Jesus did. Each one of them had taught the things Jesus had taught them. Each one of them had encountered what they would call demons who had made themselves at home in the spirits of people and then had cast those demons out, just like Jesus. Disciples do what their teacher does. So seeing Jesus walking on the surface of the Sea of Galilee as if he were out for a stroll down a village lane, Simon wanted to do that, God bless him. And at least for a few steps, he did. Jesus stopped and waited for him to come out, and Simon put one foot in front of the other as he walked gingerly over the swells that lifted and dropped him, riding them like a seabird floating on top. But the wind, it continued to lash at him, and the waves seemed to unsettle him with their rush, and then one foot began to dip under the surface instead of staying on top, and his face changed from joyful to fearful, and he started to look around at the storm that had held them captive here in the center of the lake for so many hours. "Lord, save me," he called out, no longer sure he could do this thing that he was doing. But Jesus was right there. He grabbed out his hand, held on to Simon, steadied him, and he grinned as he gently teased his friend. "Hey, let's go, faithless one. Why are you doubting?" And they made their way those few steps back into the boat. Jesus helped Simon in before putting a hand on the edge and vaulting in himself. And then, just as Jesus' feet hit the deck, the wind stopped. It didn't die down, it just stopped. And looking around with some surprise, now that they could see, they realized they had reached the shore right beside the town they had been working to get to all night long. It only took a few minutes, maybe less, to turn the boat and put into shore, where they all hopped out onto solid ground and dropped the mooring anchor. There would only be a few hours to rest before people would realize Jesus had arrived, and the stream of folks looking for healing and answers would begin. Now, did any of the disciples know what to make of this? Well, Mark, in his telling of this story, says that they were all amazed because they hadn't understood about the loaves. As if the fact they couldn't comprehend how Jesus made food appear for thousands of people meant that they didn't have a chance of getting the walking on water thing, at least not yet. It would come to them eventually. That's why they wrote it down and why we still talk about it today. Even though I think we still don't always understand about the loaves, and not getting that, we really can't get this. This is one of the most startling of the stories of Jesus. It's one we teach in Sunday school and in church with amazing regularity, and I do think we often miss the point or points. For example, what exactly do you think Peter was doubting when he started to sink? Was he doubting whether Jesus had enough power to keep both of them above the water? Or was he doubting his own ability to do what his master asked? Or was it something else? Think about the question I asked back at the beginning of this. Why don't followers of Jesus walk on water, or at least try to now? I said I have an answer, but I don't like it. Before I share, though, let me remind you of a verse. In the book of Job, chapter 9, verse 8, Job is sharing about the Lord God when he says, "He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea." In Psalm 89, the songwriter says, "Who is like you, Lord God Almighty? You, Lord, are mighty, and your faithfulness surrounds you. You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." In another psalm, speaking about people at sea, we're taught that they saw the deeds of God in the deep, but that the waves lifting and dropping them made their courage melt away. It goes on to say that when they cried out to the Lord, he brought them out of their distress and calmed the storm. Sounds like our story of Peter and the others, doesn't it? During the Exodus, who provided food for the people of God while they were in the wilderness? Yeah, God did, of course. Manna, quail, and water, enough for everyone to have their fill. When Jesus had hungry people in the wilderness, who fed them? Jesus. God did. Everything they could eat, and then leftovers too, right? And who walked across the waves and calmed them to bring his people out of their distress? Jesus. We're told that the disciples didn't understand the bread, so they couldn't understand Jesus walking on the sea. What is the connection that they were missing? Isn't it that they have missed who Jesus is? When Matthew tells the story of Jesus walking on the sea, he says that when Jesus got into the boat, the wind stopped and they worshiped him, saying that he was truly the Son of God. They may or may not have recognized that he was God, but they knew that Jesus was some kind of link to the divine. But only Simon got out of the boat while the storm raged. The rest of them hadn't realized about the bread and what it meant. They hadn't put the pieces together to understand who Jesus was. The author of the fourth gospel says that when they realized who Jesus was when he was walking across the water through the storm, that they became willing to take him into the boat. Before that, they were just like, no, don't get in our boat. Whatever you are. But when they're like, oh, it's Jesus. Oh, please get into our boat. And I just love that Simon at that moment is like, can I get out of the boat? If you don't realize who Jesus is, and I mean really, truly believe that he is who he says, that he can do things like raise the dead and feed people who have no food and walk on water and calm storms, if you don't realize who Jesus is, how will you ever trust him enough to do what he teaches? Why don't we walk on water? Why don't we love our enemies? Why don't we love one another and work to build up the community God tasked us to build on earth? It's because we don't believe that Jesus is who he said he was, even after he demonstrated it. Why did Peter doubt? He doubted who Jesus was because only God has power to tread on waves. I don't like this answer. Why don't we do the things Jesus said we can do? Because we have so little faith. When the disciples couldn't cast out a demon that had possessed a boy, Jesus had to do it for them. And they asked why they couldn't do it. And Jesus said, it's because you lack faith. He said if their faith was even the size of a mustard seed, that teeny tiny little thing, that they could order mountains to move and they would. He said nothing would be impossible for them, even just We refuse to believe in who Jesus is. We refuse to believe that we can do what he says we can do. And the world is poorer for our doubt. So I am begging you, and I'm saying this to myself as well, get out of the boat. Be like the master. We can do everything that he did and even greater things. How do I know that? Because he told us and he showed us that it's possible. We just choose not to believe. Take a moment and search your soul and pray this question to God. What do you want me to know from this story? And I want you to take what you hear, what you believe God has said to you, what the Spirit has said to your spirit. I want you to take that. What do you want me to know from this story? Write it down. Write it down. And look at that every day this week. And let that knowledge guide your choice of whether you will choose to believe. Amen? Hey, whoever you are, wherever you are, I need you to remember one thing. You have nothing to fear because God is with you. There is nowhere you can go in this world that God isn't already present, even in the storm outside of your boat. Get out of the boat. Just turn and go with God in whatever you do. And grace and peace to each and every one of you in the coming week. I'll catch you next time.